Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, this is Oxhorn, and today let's talk a little bit about alleged contradictions in Fallout 4. You all know that I love Fallout 4, but one of the major complaints that my viewers have with Fallout 4 is how it contradicts the established lore from previous Fallout titles. Now, I want to make a distinction between contradiction and retcon. A contradiction only takes place when two things cannot be true at the same time. Let's say a blind man asked two friends to describe a zebra. One friend says it's black. The other friend says it's white. This at first appears to be a contradiction, but it's not. Both of the friends are correct. The zebra is black, but it is also white. The zebra is both black and white. That's not a contradiction. Instead, the blind man simply got two different true answers. Here's an example of a contradiction. A blind man asks his friend, "Can you see stripes on the zebra?" And the friend says, "No, I can't." The blind man then asks, "Well, then how do you know that it's black and white?" And the friend responds, "Because I can see the stripes." That's a contradiction. He can't both see the stripes and not be able to see the stripes at the same time. Now, a retcon can be contradictory, but it is not always contradictory. A retcon, or retroactive continuity, happens when an author alters what was supposed to be a fact of lore established in a previous piece of work. Now, according to the Wikipedia article on the topic, there are 4 different kinds of retcons: addition retcons, alteration retcons, subtraction retcons, and temporal compression retcons. But for the purposes of this video and for Fallout 4, I only want to talk about 2: addition and alteration retcons. An addition retcon simply fills in missing details about the lore. These details had not been provided in previous games or previous books, which may have led readers or viewers to make different assumptions about the world. But since those things had not been clarified in previous works, the author takes the opportunity to explain those things in a contemporary work. In this way, these new details may explain things that had been set in stone in previous games. Addition retcons are not contradictions. They simply add to the world. It's totally possible for an addition retcon to exist in the world before the new piece of work was published. So to clarify, if Fallout 4 creates an addition retcon, this retcon must be able to exist in the world of Fallout even if the game Fallout 4 had never been created, because it does not contradict with any of the other established lore. An example of an addition retcon in Fallout 4 is the Deathclaw. The Deathclaw has evolved in the Fallout universe ever since the very first Fallout game. We all know that the Deathclaw is actually a mutant Jackson's chameleon. The Jackson's chameleon is a 3-horned chameleon native to East Africa, but recently introduced to America. You can find it in California, Hawaii, and Florida. The United States government researched the Deathclaw before the war, which is why we find a Deathclaw head inside the RoboBrain factory, but it was actually the Master who refined the Deathclaw by subjecting them to the Forced Evolutionary Virus, or FEV. Now, we learn early in the lore of Fallout that the chameleon does not have vocal cords and has lost its ability to change color. The problem, of course, is that the Deathclaws in the world of Fallout 4 have an ear-splitting roar, and at high levels you can come upon the chameleon Deathclaw. This Deathclaw can change colors during the course of a fight. What's the deal? Is this a contradiction? No, I argue that this is an addition retcon. And I say that because scientists in our own world frequently retcon reality. For example, for hundreds of years, scientists thought that the Laotian rock rat was extinct. They thought it went extinct 11 million years ago. But recently, they found the Laotian rock rat living alive and well in 1996. Similarly, scientists thought that the Chicoan peccary was extinct. They only knew the animal by its fossils until they discovered the animal alive and well in 1975. Scientists weren't lying to us when they said that the Laotian rock rat and the Chicoan peccary were extinct. They simply hadn't found any evidence showing that they existed. To tie this back into Fallout 4, we only think that the chameleon can no longer change colors because we haven't observed it to do so. It could be that somewhere in its genetic code, the Deathclaw still retains the ability to change colors during extreme circumstances, which are so rare that we only ever find them happening in Fallout 4. We can explain the roaring issue in a similar way. Jackson chameleons are incredibly tiny creatures. As creatures get larger, they make more noise. They make more noise when walking, they make more noise when breathing. It's quite possible that air can escape from a Deathclaw's stomach and pass some sort of fold or muscle that causes the Deathclaw to make something that sounds like a roar. That is, just because the Jackson chameleon does not have vocal cords and cannot make a noise, does not mean that a highly evolved Deathclaw, doused with the FEV, should not be able to make noise, especially when we learn that the United States military mixed the Deathclaw with a bunch of other animal stock, not just the Jackson chameleon. With the genetic material from so many different creatures inside the Deathclaw, there's really no telling what this creature could do. In fact, the biggest issue that I have with the Deathclaw is that it lays eggs. Jackson chameleons don't lay eggs. Jackson chameleons carry their young for between 5 and 6 months and then give birth to between 5 or 10 live Jackson chameleons. They are not oviparous, they do not lay eggs, and yet in every Fallout game where the Deathclaws are depicted, including the very first one, the Deathclaws lay eggs. So this is one of those situations where we just gotta throw up our hands and say, we don't know what sort of animal genetic cocktail comprises the Deathclaws, we believe what we see. And we see a Deathclaw that can roar, lay eggs, and change colors. Another addition retcon that has been bugging a lot of people is the existence of the T-60 suit of power armor. Now, if you believe that this is a contradictory retcon, I'm not going to hold it against you. That's a perfectly rational position to hold. However, I don't think that we have to believe that it's a contradiction. We can easily explain the existence of the T-60 suit of power armor as an addition retcon. Now, the reason many say that the existence of the T-60 set of power armor is a contradiction is because in all of the Fallout games previously, the most advanced version of power armor before the war was the T-51B suit of power armor. Annoyingly, even in Fallout 4, we find a loading screen that says that the T-51 series of power armor was the pinnacle of mechanized protection before the Great War. So it seems that we've got a contradiction. Everywhere we turn, the T-51 is the most powerful suit of power armor, and yet we've got this T-60 suit of power armor, which is clearly superior. What gives? Well, the T-60 suit of power armor never saw combat. The United States military defended Anchorage, Alaska, and defeated the Red Chinese wearing the T-51B suits of power armor. But when they came back home, they were then deployed domestically to keep the peace. During this time, the United States military had been working on the successor to the T-45 suit, which became known as the T-60. Because this was a recent innovation, no soldiers ever used it in combat against the Chinese. Instead, soldiers who were used as peacekeepers against their own citizens used the T-60 suit of power armor very briefly before the bombs dropped in 2077. This then raises the question, well, if that's the case, why didn't we hear about the T-60 in any of the previous Fallout games? And why did all of those games list the T-51B as the most advanced suit? I think this can be explained with how new the T-60 suit of power armor was. Much of what we learn about power armor comes from Vault-Tec. A lot of the records that were kept by Vault-Tec, and many of these records were old. If the United States military had just released a brand new line of power armor, it may be so new that Vault-Tec had not been able to update their records, which talked about pre-war technology, before the bombs dropped. Well, then why don't we find any T-60 power armor outside of the Commonwealth? Well, we learned from the terminal entries at Fort Strong that the Boston area was used to research and develop both the Fat Man and the T-51 suit of power armor. If a research facility like Fort Strong in Boston, Massachusetts was used to research the T-51 suit of power armor, it's likely that this same facility was used to research and develop the Hush Hush T-60 suit of power armor, which may mean that the T-60 suit of power armor had a limited release only to soldiers in the Boston area keeping the peace in Boston, which would explain why we see United States military soldiers wearing T-60 suits of power armor outside of Vault 111 at the beginning of the game. This may also help explain how the Brotherhood of Steel got their hands on the T-60. The only ones in the game who use the T-60 are the Brotherhood of Steel. Everyone else uses T-45, T-51, or Raider. Why is that? Well, there's a whole lot of T-51, T-45, and Raider power armor out there. Up until this point, the T-60 was not even known to have existed. My bet is that the Brotherhood of Steel came swooping in on the Pridwin, and one of the places they raided was either Fort Strong, where they got the T-60 suits of power armor that they used for the Brotherhood, or an unmentioned storage facility in the general area, possibly attached to Fort Strong, where T-60 was stored. We learned from Paladin Dance that the Brotherhood now has the ability to manufacture T-60 power armor, and they could probably only do that if they actually captured the original facility that manufactured the T-60 power armor. So here's another example, I think, where we don't necessarily have to believe that this is a contradiction. It simply could be an addition retcon. The developers of Fallout 4 are fleshing out the story of power armor. They're telling us things that we just didn't know before. All of the pre-war information that told us that the T-51 suit of power armor was the most advanced is all still accurate, it's all still correct, simply because they didn't know that the T-60 existed, because the T-60 was so new. Now, an example of an alteration retcon, a retcon that actually contradicts the lore, is the way power armor is used. In previous versions of Fallout 4, you actually had to get power armor training from the Brotherhood of Steel, for example, before you could wear it. In Fallout 4, they completely changed the mechanics of power armor. In previous games, you did not need a power armor frame. They were not powered by fusion cores. Both of those are completely new inventions. And yeah, this does contradict the previous games. There's no explaining it, there's no getting around it, but we can understand it. You see, fiction authors and comic book authors and video game makers will sometimes use an alteration retcon to improve upon something that they felt was limiting them. Each new Fallout game has got to be different. It can't just be a recycling of everything we found in the previous game. That's going to get boring. The creators also need to feel like they're free to come up with new ideas. I don't know about you, but I prefer the way power armor works in Fallout 4. I love the fact that Bethesda has conceptualized power armor as being more like a vehicle instead of just a suit of armor. It's way more fun to use. It's beautiful. It fits in with the world. It's got amazing style. This is an example of a retcon that I really like. I'm glad they did it. Yeah, it does make it inconsistent with previous Fallout games, but I personally think that it's worth it. Now here are some things that are not retcons, and they're not really contradictions. Finding pipe pistols in pre-war safes. We know that pipe pistols are created by wastelanders and scavengers from bits and pieces of wood and metal that they happen to find around the wasteland. These are improvised weapons. What are they doing in a pre-war safe? This isn't part of the lore. This isn't a retcon or a contradiction, it's a game engine limitation. You see, every single container, especially locked containers, is going to randomly generate loot from a loot table. Now, it would probably be a Herculean undertaking to mark every single container in the game as either pre-war and post-war, and then have a pre-war or post-war loot table for those particular containers. So Bethesda came up with one loot table for containers that is altered by your stats, your level, and your perks, and on that loot table you can find any gun in the game, including the pipe guns, which sadly makes it possible for you to find a gun in a safe when it should not be there. Of course, this could always be fixed by an energetic modder. I'm sure it's possible for a modder to split the loot table and to go through every single container in the entire game, in every building, and then mark each one as a pre-war or post-war container, and then feed those containers the appropriate loot lists. If the lore is that important, someone will make the mod, I tell you that. But that's a game limitation. That's not really a lore issue. The big retcon that I think is unnecessary and that I don't understand is the one about Jet. We know where Jet comes from. Jet plays an important role in Fallout 2. In Fallout 2, we meet the inventor of Jet, a young boy genius named Myrnon. What makes this even more frustrating is we know the lengths that Myrnon went to invent Jet. He started with growing mushrooms because the nearby land at that time was so irradiated that it couldn't grow anything else. He learned that hallucinogens were plentiful in Brahmin dung. This is because before the war, big meat companies had experimented with a cheap protein extract for growing food. However, they couldn't sell this for human consumption because it reacted with bacteria, so they fed it to cattle. These cattle that were fed the cheap protein extract mutated and evolved to become become Brahmin. These Brahmin inherited a mutation from their ancestors who were fed this cheap protein extract that caused their feces to give humans intoxicating hallucinations. Knowing this, he mixed the intoxicating fumes of the Brahmin dung with the mushrooms he had grown, lysergic acid, dithylamide, psilocybin, and THC. The resulting concoction was Jet. You see, we know a whole lot about how Jet was invented. And yet in Fallout 4, we find terminal entries in the Vault-Tec corporate headquarters talking about sending a shipment of Jet to Vault 95. It's not that we just found Jet in Vault 95. That could easily be explained away by just saying it's game mechanics, like I talked about earlier. But no, this is an actual terminal entry that says Jet. We, Vault-Tec, shipped Jet to Vault 95. That should not be able to exist. That is a legitimate, contradictory alteration retcon. Now, this can be explained away if you really want to. For example, we could simply say that if anyone was going to discover the fact that Brahmin feces had intoxicating qualities, it would probably be a pre-war institution like MedTech that had the money and the laboratories and the people to experiment on something like Brahmin dung. Now, we could only assume this if we also assume that the intoxicating property of Brahmin dung was also in cow dung, the cows that had been fed the experimental meat product. Maybe MedTech found out about these cows being fed this product, then experimented on their dung, found the intoxicating qualities of the dung, and then produced Jet. If that were the case, then Mirnan didn't invent Jet, he reinvented Jet. MedTech, or a company like it, invented the original Jet, which is why we find it mentioned by Vault-Tec, and Mirnan simply reinvented it. I have a problem with that theory just because it takes a whole lot of what-ifs. And I'm comfortable with taking what-ifs if they make sense, but we really have to stretch with this one. In particular, Mirnan's Jet came from Brahmin dung. Brahmin did not exist before the war. Brahmin are mutated, evolved cows and cattle. I find it highly unlikely that an addictive aspect of Brahmin dung would have remained unchanged while the animal itself changed from a cow to a Brahmin over the span of a couple hundred years, which is what we would be forced to assume if it was already intoxicating before the war. At any rate, I wanted to talk about retcons today because I think retcons are more often than not a good thing. It's good that developers have enough passion about Fallout 4 and the Fallout franchise that they want to grow it, that they want to make it different. We can't expect a new Fallout game to come out and be exactly the same. That would be boring. That would only please the hardcore fans. And of course, Bethesda wants to grow the Fallout brand. They've got to appeal to new people. Limiting the game to only what we already know also stunts creative growth. I love the fact that Power Armor takes a fusion core and requires a Power Armor frame. And we would be missing that if Bethesda felt so married to the lore that they didn't feel that they had the creative freedom to make this kind of retcon. So retcons are not a bad thing, and I don't think that we can blame Bethesda for making retcons in Fallout 4. The only retcons that I don't like are unnecessary ones. Retcons that don't add anything new to the world. They're not creative, they don't make the world more interesting and dynamic, they're just lazy or simple mistakes. Like the deal with Jet. All they had to do was not put that terminal entry in the Vault-Tec headquarters and we wouldn't be having this conversation. That one terminal entry is the only thing that bothers me. I even don't mind finding Jet in Vault 95 because we could have always said that the Gunners brought it there. I wouldn't even mind finding it in that locked container because then we could always just say, well, it's a game mechanic. It's an issue with the loot table. But because there's that terminal entry in the Vault-Tec headquarters in downtown Boston, we can't make that excuse, which simply makes this a lazy retcon, which is a contradiction and it bothers me. But not enough to be peeved at Fallout 4, not enough to stop playing, and not enough to have the entire experience ruined for me. Let's pick our battles, ladies and gentlemen. Let's choose when and when not to be offended, when and when not to take up arms in angry rebellion, and let's enjoy things for what they are. That is the secret to enjoying the games that we spend our money on, and that's also the secret to simply being happier people. But all of this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on retcons, ladies and gentlemen? Do you think that retcons should just simply be forbidden and no one should ever do anything that could possibly be seen as a contradiction? Or do you think that Bethesda and other creators are free to make addition retcons and even alteration retcons if they think that it's important? Let me know in the comments section below. I read all of your comments and I use them as inspiration for my future videos. And did you know that I had a t-shirt shop? I realize I mention it in every video that I produce, but I'm working with the guys at Teespring to produce new shirts based on the results of the poll that I put out a few days ago. Thank you all for participating. We've got some wonderful results and we're going to have some new shirt designs that are Fallout 4 inspired coming out soon. If you'd like to see the designs I've already got available for you, you can find a link to my Teespring's shirt shop in the description below. And if you like what I do and you want to support me in a more personal way, consider becoming one of my patrons on Patreon. Patreon subscribers gain access to a private channel on my Discord server, as well as a bunch of other cool Oxhorn perks. But more than anything, ladies and gentlemen, I'm just so glad you're here watching this video with me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow morning as always, bright and early, with a brand new video.